Thanks everyone for coming and joining us here. Mon nom est Nancy Smythe et je travaille avec GAC. I think
with GAP.
Comment, so I better say Global Affairs Canada. J'utilise le mot. Really delighted to be here with this panel this afternoon that I think is going to touch on a number of the issues that have come up over the last day or two, and delighted to have three guests with us here to be speaking on such an important topic of gender transformative health and multisectoral approaches to addressing harmful practices. And I have here with me Nidhi Bansal, who's on here on my left, working with Plan International as the Director of Gender Equality and Child Protection. We have a nice Lingetti who's here, welcome, and we're so excited to have you with us here with MREF. And we have Sarah Anderson, who's with Care Canada. So I think we've got bios that are available online, so I'll trust for you to learn more about them, and hopefully, and I'm sure their stories will come out as we're speaking here today. So just to say, in terms of some of those links, so youth involvement has been such a huge piece of that, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about that in this session. Talk about a session where we can relate to all the discussions around urgent action. And so really happy that this has been included as a theme. And then on the topic of multisectoral, which has been such a pervasive theme over the last day and a half, the comprehensive approach. So we're really, really delighted in that respect. Comme beaucoup d'entre vous le savez, les pratiques...
As many of you know, there are early weddings with adolescent girls and multiple forms of violent and harmful practices that threaten the well-being of adolescents, abuse their human rights.
The health impact of these two harmful practices include increased infant and maternal mortality related to complications during pregnancy and birth, increased risk of obstructive fistula and infections, and a number of long-term physical and mental health problems. And again, the theme around the mental health association is such an important one here. We know from the data, we've just had a session on data, FGM affecting 200 million girls across the world, and 15 million each year girls forced into early marriage. So those numbers are pretty staggering. And so delighted, we're going to have a bit of a conversation here back and forth as opposed to one-off presentations. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with a bit of a discussion around framing some of the issue. Et juste, j'aimerais vous rappeler que la discussion aura lieu en...
It will be in English, however. Afterwards, you can ask your questions in French as well.
I'm going to turn to you, Nidhi, and just to ask you to talk a little bit about some of the underlying drivers and root causes of these harmful practices, and just talk to us a little bit about some big picture issues that we should have in mind as we kick off this panel discussion.
Definitely. So the harmful traditional practices are deeply rooted in the societal attitudes and beliefs. So a belief that promotes the idea that men are superior to women, and therefore we can very clearly say that it is rooted in the discriminatory gender norms that are upheld by societies for a very, very long period of time. Now, in saying that, one of the important elements to consider is that these attitudes are held and they form an understanding of what it means to be a woman or a man. It sort of defines the identity of a man or a woman in a community, the traditional identity. And but the underlying these practices is also a means of controlling the sexuality of women, means of controlling the sexual purity, which is considered very, very important in some of the cultures, And then the way these are enforced tend to maintain the lower status of women. So all in all, the root cause of traditional practices, traditional practices tends to be a gender unequal norms and practices. And we invariably see that these practices are pervasive in a climate where women and girls have unequal access to health, wealth, education, resources. So, and in situations where women and girls are living in poorer or poverty situations, they pose extra barriers for them to come out of these practices or to oppose these practices. In recent times, we are also seeing that a revival of a fundamentalist environment is also seeing a revival and strengthening of traditional practices. So underlying these harmful practices is gender inequality. Then these practices can vary across many societies, but what remains same across, common across all the cultures is this whole idea of inequality. And now, having said that, men and boys also face some of these practices. It's not just women and girls who face these practices, but they disproportionately negatively impact women and girls. Their health, their well-being, their ability to attain highest standards of health, opportunity to access opportunities, and to determine their life course.
Thanks for that. So I think in your comments, you started to get a little bit into the multisectoral approach, but maybe just a few comments about what that means to you in this context around how we approach these harmful practices, but also what does gender transformative mean to you?
Absolutely. So the most important element is to identify what is the root cause of these harmful practices. And in that analysis, when we find that the root cause is a gender inequality, then a gender transformative approach becomes imperative to address this practice and any of the practices that we are trying to address. Now, at Plan International, we have, through years of experience, we have come to an understanding that an integrated multi-sectoral approach at different levels is essential for addressing these issues. And at the heart of it is the idea of empowering girls and women to take their own decisions, choose their life course, and assert their rights. Now, if that is at the heart, then we talk of 3 levels at which we need to work concurrently. And the first level is at the level of the rights bearers, that is the girls themselves. Empowering the girls, enhancing their agency, building their experiences, exposure to be able to enable them to take their decisions. The second level is creating a social environment which supports. So working with the moral duty bearers, which includes their parents, their community leaders, the neighbors, men and boys in their lives, as well as CSOs, private sector actors. So all of the non-governmental actors who need to come together to create a social environment that supports girls to assert their agency. And then the last layer is the principal duty bearers, which is your state actors, your institutions, policies and laws that have to provide an enabling environment within which the whole thing can operate. So you have to work at 3 levels, but also multi-sectoral is important. You have to understand that the barriers that girls face in addressing these practices are interrelated. So, for example, a girl who is being forced into an early marriage faces multiple barriers because she is probably out of school, is not in school, doesn't have options for economic empowerment. It doesn't have access to sexual reproductive health services, and also it lives in a context where the child protection institutional services and child protection mechanisms are very weak. So you have to take all the multi-sectoral, multiple sectors into account to come up with a comprehensive solution.
Thanks for that, and I think we'll take those really important overarching concepts and see nice in your own context, appreciating that, as Nidhi has said, context is everything. Thanks so much for being here with us, and you're going to share with us a little bit about your own context and your own journey that you've taken as an advocate to end FGMC. So please tell us a bit about your story.
Thank you. I think my journey has started when I was a young girl, because that is when I started realizing that circumcision is being done to girls of my age. At that time, when I was 7 years old, I used to go and see other girls undergoing circumcision. They have to prepare you early enough because, one, remember, there are things that you're supposed not to do. You're not supposed to cry or even move your body. It means that there is no man from that community who is going to marry you. And when I was 7 years old, that is when I lost my parents, my father and mother. And I was, we went and lived with our grandfather because we did not have anyone to take care of us. And when I went to my grandfather's place is when I was taken to a boarding school, and that is when I started realizing that circumcision is not done to all girls. I mean, it's not done to all communities. And actually, girls from my school could know that you are a girl from my community. You know the way girls bath in big bathrooms together. They would want to see how a circumcised girls look like, and that traumatized a lot of girls from my community, that many of them dropped out of school. And when we closed our schools, now it was my time, and my uncle came to our grandfather's place, and he told my uncle that I'm circumcising my 3 girls, so we need Nice and her sister to join her 3 cousins. And at that time, I was telling my sister that I don't want to undergo circumcision. She was telling me the same. And I told my grandfather that if I agree to undergo circumcision, I will die like so-and-so, or I will leave school like so-and-so and be married at that young age. But no one was really listening at us. So we went to his place, and we woke up on the actual day that we were supposed to undergo the cut, because you're supposed to wake up as early as 4 a.m. in the morning. So we woke up and we showered with cold water, because the cold water is supposed to act as anesthesia. They're not giving you any injection. So when we showered with the cold water, we already planned with my sister on how we are going to escape, and we walked outside his home, our uncle's home, and we climbed a tree that was there. So I climbed first with her help, and then she climbed. So when we were there, actually we could see the circumcised are coming with a group of men, but again we could not come down because there was dark. We might meet wild animals, so even, it's at night, you don't know what you're going to see. So when there was light, we came down and we walked for about 20 kilometers to our mother's sister's place, and we told her that we don't want to undergo through the cut. We want to go back to school. But you see, again, being a woman in that community, she was voiceless, so she cannot even call my uncles or anyone from my family and tell them that this is, it's not supposed to be done. And then again, she doesn't understand also why we are running away, because she's a woman who grew up in that community. She has undergone the cut, so she's also not understanding why. So our uncle realized that we were there. He came and we were beaten and threatened. So we had to promise that next time we are going to proceed with the cut. We're not going to run away. So we went back to school and closed our schools again, and our uncle came for us, and he said, you know very well, you cannot run away from this. You cannot be considered a woman in this community. We have not undergone the cut. We don't want you to shame our family, because you've seen that all girls of your age are all circumcised. So why do you think, or why do you want to change that culture? So he had already circumcised our 3 daughters, so we went to his place and we woke up at the same time and we showered. And I told my sister I cannot sit here, even if it means running away 20 times, I will run, I will not stay here. So my sister told me, no, nice, I cannot be running away every time. The other time we were beaten. Maybe this time around they will do something worse. So she said, I will stay, but I will not say where you will go. So just go to the same place. So I went to the same tree, but I wanted to come down and probably help her, but I was like, okay, if I go, they will do it forcibly to me. So I don't I cannot really go and help her. So I stayed in the same tree and came down, but I never went back to my mother's sister's place. I decided to go back to school and stay there. So I stayed in my school until later on, I went back to my grandfather and told him, as a girl, I don't want to undergo the cut. My sister underwent the cut, and after some time she was married. So I don't want to be like her. I don't want to be like so-and-so that I saw in my village. And I think that is when I started to realize that I don't need to wait for others to come to my community and make change. I think it should start with me. And growing up in that community, all people saw me as a bad example at that time. They were like, you cannot even play with, girls of your age because they are saying you're a bad example. You are against your family. It's like, really, I was a bad example to the community. But it took time, but I said, I need to talk to them. We need to sit down together and find solutions because I think it's a very sensitive cultural issue. If you complain to people every time, I think you will not be able to solve the problem. So I took a chance to mobilize my community, and that is how we started a movement on finding better solutions to save our girls. Thank you.
Nice, thank you for the courage to share that story with us and for the courage of what you've done in your community. We're going to come back and hear a little bit more about that work that you've done to mobilize the efforts. And we want to bring, before we do that, Sarah into the conversation and hear a little bit about her story and some of the program work that you've been working on, particularly around ending child early forced marriage in West Africa. So.
Yeah, sure. First, I just want to say thank you to NICE for sharing such a personal story. I know that can't be easy in front of a room full of people, so thank you. I'm not going to talk more about my personal experience. I'll talk more about the project that we have through CARE, which is called the TON Project, which is focused on child early and forced marriage in Benin and Mali, and it's funded by Global Affairs Canada. It's a 2-year project, and the goal is focusing on strengthening the prevention and the mitigation of the effects of CEFM, which is what I'll refer to child early and forced marriage to from here on out. We work multisectorally with multiple actors at multiple levels. So we work within education systems, within formal schools, also with schools that are more apprenticeship style or technical schools. We work with health providers, more social services, I guess we would say in English. And we work a lot with law enforcement officials locally. We also work with community leaders and religious leaders so that we're trying to work on, like I said, the prevention and the mitigation of the effects. We also work with children within schools, more so youth and adolescents, so that they can then become champions and voices within their communities, among their peers, within their schools, and within their families. What else was I going to say? We also support survivors, So survivors are girls that have been able to leave their so-called marriages, and they require a lot of support. So we work with them to access health services, to hopefully be able to go back to their families, which is not always possible because there's a perceived shame there. We also work with them, it was mentioned about economic opportunities or independence for them so that they can then have training. In Benin, we have a center that we support that houses girls who've been able to leave their marriages. They have about 80 girls at the moment between the ages of 12 and 25 who've been able to leave their marriages, and then they do 3 years apprenticeship training, which could be hairdressing, sewing, weaving, or creating beautiful African fabric, and then they can, when they leave there, they have the skills they need to become economically independent so that they don't need to return to their so-called husband, and if they can't return to their families, they're economically independent, and if they do return to their families, and if they can return to their families, I should say, they're more seen as economic asset instead of an economic liability.
Thanks very much, Sarah. So maybe let's go back to Nidhi, just in terms of, Sarah's talked about prevention, mitigation, working with survivors. So from your experience, how can we better integrate prevention and response measures in some of this work that we're doing across sectors to create more of a comprehensive approach to try to eliminate these harmful practices?
So one of the big challenges in implementing a multisectoral or comprehensive approach is about bringing the actors together that generally work in silos or are, as we call it, vertically integrated. So government systems are vertically integrated, with education department having its own programs and priorities, health department comes with its own priorities, the women's development department will have its own. So the big challenge is to bring these actors together. And it can be done in two ways. One is intentionally bringing the actors together to sit together and develop a plan that works for the girls' empowerment. But a key issue to remember is that any of these plans have to be girl-led plan. So the agency of girls themselves has to be at the core of this, as Nice's story very nicely illustrates that sustainable solution and a real solution will only come from the girls themselves who go through these experiences. So yeah, a girl-led solution to identify the barriers they face in accessing any of these services. And most often we find that these barriers are similar or interrelated. They are common or interrelated barriers. And if these are interrelated barriers, if the barriers are almost the same for accessing health services and accessing education, or education becomes a barrier to accessing sexual reproductive health services, then why not bring all the actors together to develop a comprehensive plan that works for the girls? Bring not only the government actors together, but also other actors. In a community, the community itself also has resources, has a role to play. So bring all the stakeholders, I would say, together in planning, with a very central role of girls in determining what that plan should look like. That's one way of doing it intentionally. The other way of doing it is, even if these are sectorally driven plans and programs, if we can look at the root causes, do a root cause analysis with girls, the sectoral plans and programs and departments will still reach the same conclusion if there was a gender analysis and a root cause analysis. So that's another very important tool in our hands to drive actors to undertake a root causes analysis to identify the root barriers for girls to achieve these, and that will probably help to bring multisectoral or comprehensive solutions to life.
Sarah, does that speak to you in terms of your own experience in Benin and Mali, and what would you say? Have you experienced this working in silo phenomenon? Have you seen the investments that need to be made in terms of, as one of the panelists I think earlier today has talked about, investing in that intersection between those sectors? What have you seen in terms of best practice, and how do you make those results sustainable over time?
Sure, like I said, I mean, we're trying to work multisectorally and make sure that the different actors are coming together and working together so that they're not working in silos. And I think if we want to look at best practices, I think she just explained it very well. And the only thing I would add that I think if we want to look at any of these kind of projects is that we really need to understand the social, the cultural, and the political context. We need to understand what's really happening, why are these harmful practices happening, and then we need to work within that to figure out what we can do to change it, because in order to change this sort of practice, it's a social transformation, which is really, really difficult. So we need to look at what it's like and why, how are we going to change it within that. And I think that In terms of sustainability, we need community buy-in, we need community champions. This was only a 2-year project that CARE is working on. It's really short, but we are seeing great changes already, and we have great testimonies. And if I can, I'll just tell you one really quickly. I have a testimony, and if you look up the CARE Tom project online, you'll see it, but it's a father named Ibrahim in Mali who had a young daughter, and he had promised her off to another man, and before he had received a dowry, so a price in exchange, if we want to say that, for his daughter, and he attended a community dialogue on the consequences of child early and forced marriage, and he went home and he was so shocked that he called up his future so-called son-in-law and had a meeting with his family on the spot and said, I'm canceling this, I do not want this to happen to my daughter, I'm not going to be responsible for this, and he gave back the dowry. And he said the only way to create change is that we need people to lead by example, and I'm going to be the first in my community, and I'm going to lead by example so others will follow.
That's a tremendous story. So thanks for getting us on to the issue of social norms and social change, and nice. I'm hoping you can come in on this just in terms of your experience in Kenya and what sort of work you've been involved in. What do you see that works in terms of moving this positive shift forward in terms of changing some mindsets and behavior?
I think working in these communities, I think one lesson that I've really learned is that you should always talk less and listen more. And I think patience, it needs patience, because it's a very sensitive cultural issue. It's not like, like malaria projects whereby you know there is a malaria outbreak, you give people mosquito nets, and the next week, the village is out of malaria. So these are very sensitive cultural issue that really takes time, because one, you really need to understand and sit down with these communities and really understand what are the myths and reasons behind circumcision, because I think they are unique in different ways. Reasons for the Maasai why they are doing circumcision are very different with reasons why the Muslim people are doing circumcision, because like in my community is a stage from girlhood to womanhood, which is one of the things that it's one symbolic that we cannot really assume. So I think what we have been able to do is to try and use a holistic approach whereby we are involving both men and women in our communities, and morely we start empowering young girls from the age of 7 in schools whereby they are young. But we're not just talking to girls, we are also involving boys when they are also still young, because in future they will be, old men, they will be marrying the girls we are talking to. So we really also need to show them on the importance of growing up, respecting women, because it's the only way we are able to overcome all of the other forms of gender-based violence. But I think the other thing is that we try to ensure that the community does not think that we are tampering with their culture, because we're not saying everything you are doing in your culture is bad. We really want to embrace whatever that we think is good in your culture. Like, the way we dress, our, bead wearing, our traditional songs, putting the red color, it's not really harmful to anyone. So these are the good cultures that we really want to remain with. And in the whole process of female circumcision, what we saw as a problem is the cut only. So what we try to do is that, what can we do? And what we did is that we replaced the cut with education. All the other traditions, girls, and other rituals that we used to undergo when we are performing our circumcision, they remain the same. So basically what we were able to do is to try and put a 3-day training ceremony whereby we teach these girls on sexual and reproductive health and rights issues. It's not just about FGM, because if we talk about FGM and early marriages, if we don't talk about teenage pregnancy, again, they will become pregnant and drop out of school. So we try to touch all topics on SRHRS and make sure that girls are empowered, they are able to go out and defend for their rights. Because The other thing I think I saw while we are doing our, while I've been talking to girls in schools, is that our girls are not empowered. They don't have the confidence to come out and say to their parents, like, I don't want to undergo circumcision because of this and this. You cannot even look direct to your parent, and because again, it's like lack of respect. You know, when you have like an eye contact with the old ones, they will think that you're not really respecting. But what if we teach these girls on, like ways of boosting their, confidence, how to address these issues with the old one. And I think that is one of the things we've been trying to do to make sure that our girls can go out and speak freely and talk about these issues.
Speaking, listening, patience. I think those are all great comments. Do either one of you want to jump in on this issue anymore around social norms and engagement of, yes, engagement
sure.
of communities, men, boys, etc.?
Yes, absolutely, and nice. Thank you so much for bringing and highlighting this, the value of working on the social norms broadly, not really rejecting a culture or tradition as a whole, but looking at the root, underlying disrespect for women or inequalities and harmful practices. So that is absolutely important. What I want to also say is working with men and boys is extremely important, not only looking at them as vehicles for women's empowerment, but also working with men and boys as partners who are affected by gender unequal norms themselves. So, and in that process, maybe discussing the norms around masculinity, which could be harmful. So, bringing them into this process as equal partners, rather than looking at them only as someone who is either a perpetrator to be changed or a champion to serve for women's empowerment.
Thanks.
Yeah, if I can just add, I mean, I think we need to involve men and boys because like it was said, gender affects everyone and gender inequality affects everyone. And I think it's important for us to understand that and bring men and boys in, because if we think about the toxic masculinities, we need to be able to challenge that with our young boys so that they don't grow up thinking that they need to act in a certain way, because that's what gender is, right? It's telling us how we're supposed to act as male and female without recognizing the spectrum in between. So continue to talking that binary, I think it's important to engage them because our topic today is gender transformative approaches. And we can't transform anything if we don't involve all actors. And I think patriarchal structures, and I don't want to talk about men as perpetrators, but I'm just saying patriarchal structures, a lot of times men are able to hold positions of power, whether that means in their communities as community leaders or as religious leaders or even as politicians, and sometimes even within their families as decision makers. So we need to be able to recognize those power dynamics, and we need to be able to understand them. And then if we're going to be able to transform anything with gender inequality, we need to involve everyone.
So just let's go a little bit further on that theme, and specifically, I think probably the overriding theme of this conference, which has been around youth involvement and youth engagement, but in a decision-making capacity as well. So I'd be interested if any of the three of you, I don't know who wants to start off, but maybe some concrete examples, talking about how you feel that this has added a level of importance to the programs that you work on.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I can talk about one of our, two of our programs that work both in Bangladesh. One is around MNCH project, and the other one is very, very concretely on child early and forced marriages. And in both programs, adolescent girls are a key group that we are working with. And for the child early and forced marriage programming, they are essentially in the driving seat, where, as I was describing earlier, they are the ones who help us determine what the intervention should be around, what are the key barriers that they face, and this has helped us to come to a conclusion, to reach a conclusion where we feel that we saw how important it is to engage the parents, what role the parents play, and especially the male parent or decision maker in the family plays in their lives in this decision around a child early and forced marriages. So working with girls and enabling them to have a conversation with the parent on one hand, giving them the skills and confidence to have that conversation in their families, but also working with the counterpart and parenting with the parents to be involved actively in active parenting is another element that we are finding is lacking currently in our programs, and that we need to strengthen that element of engaging parents to take more active role in parenting and build a relationship of trust. One of the things that we are finding is parents, and we did a positive deviance study studying cases of girls who were able to delay the marriage, and in that study we found that girls whose parents felt that they trusted their daughters were able to delay the marriage. Now, in this case, the trust was very much about that they educated their daughters to remain sexually pure and placed all the boundaries. But so in that sense, it wasn't a very positive experience, an empowering experience. But if we can take that example and turn it around into what should adolescent parenting look like for the parents of these girls, then it can become a very strong element in the project. On the MNCH project, again, working with the adolescent girls around the sexual reproductive health services. And in the last panel, my colleague was describing how the data is telling us what adolescents feel should the services look like for them to be able to access the service is an important element that's coming out of our program.
Sarah or Nice, do you want to jump in on this?
I think the other thing that we should really look is investing in their education. Because like an example of the community I work with, education is for the boys, it's not really for the girls. And I think we are expecting girls to make informed and better decisions, but they have to go to school and learn about these other things. And I think what we do in the alternative rites of passage, what we do to the girls is that we tried to add something we call the candle night, whereby girls come up together with their dances and songs and debates, but really trying to boost their confidence. And I think it's really extremely important to mentor and empower girls from the young age as 7 years, because an example of mine with my sister while I was 8 and she was 10, but I'm just thinking, what if we had programs either in schools or in our communities whereby we are teaching girls about these issues, about sexual and reproductive health and rights issues, what the law says, what the policies that we have in place are they saying that are protecting the rights of girls and women. And I think with that, when we start, let's say, mentorship programs for our young girls to be advocates in their community, that is the only way we will be able to bring their realities and experiences out.
Thank you. I'm conscious our clock is running down and I want to get our audience here involved, but I'm going to just ask, because you've gone exactly where we wanted to go on our last question, which is a bit about what do we need to be doing more? I mean, clearly we're seeing some results on the ground. Clearly we know it's an absolutely enormous issue. What kind of message would you want to send? And I think, Nice, you've given some ideas to us around that. What more needs to be done by who on this issue? And Sarah, I'll start you off just to give us some thoughts, and we'll go down the line and then we'll let others jump in on some questions and comments.
Sure. So I come from a human rights background, so I would say that we need to be able to work with duty bearers or states and hold them accountable. But like as it was said, there needs to be an enabling environment as well to be able to go just beyond having de facto laws or legislation that are in place. So if you look at CEFM, just having a legal age of marriage, we're seeing is not enough because it's still happening. So we have to be able to have these laws in place and that they're actually being enforced, and also that duty bearers need to uphold, respect, and protect the rights of all of their citizens, including adolescents and young people. And I think as us, as programmers, as NGOs, as academics, we need to go beyond this as well and realize that we really need to get down to the community level and work with individuals and communities. And we always say that youth or adolescents are the leaders of tomorrow, but they're here now and they have voices now, and we need to work with them and we need to help them to have their voices heard, and we need, like it was mentioned already, we need to listen to those voices.
I'll just repeat that what we've realized is an integrated, multiple-leveled approach, a long-term approach for this is a social change, social transformation we are looking at. We're looking at very sensitive, deep-seated issues. So take the time to know the context, take the time to engage all the stakeholders, but most importantly, take the time to build girls' movement and girls' leadership to lead the change.
Great.
Yeah, I think,
Last word tonight.
Yeah, I think people should be responsible. And especially, let's say, maybe I give an example where I'm coming from, whereby in Kenya we have the Prohibition Act against female genital mutilation in 2011. So we have good policies and laws that are really protecting the rights of girls and women, but no one is really responsible. The government itself is not even investing in the laws that we are putting in place. So I think once we become responsible and understand that, we don't have girls' rights and women's rights, that we try and make sure that we are considering them as human rights.
Great. Who wants to jump in on this conversation in the audience? I want to open it up for any comments or questions. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Maggie Zhang from Christian Children's Fund of Canada. Thank you for sharing all the good practice. One question is, my question is that really from Girls Center or Children's Center, Youth Center approach, how we can find a good mechanism to, at the individual level, to empower the youth at the community level, because that's a long-term solution. But I think Nadia, you touched base about the difficulty in behavior change, the harmful norms. That's really take a long-term investment and solution. But then girls being a most vulnerable group in the community level, so really need a supportive system, a mechanism to really push it forward. I want you to the panelists to share more information or good practice in terms of how to empower the youth, especially youth group at the community level. And secondly, how to build up that multiple stakeholders supportive mechanism to support that change, to really be in a transforming process. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to take 1, 2 there, and then I think there's 1 or 2 on this, and then we'll give the panelists a chance to react to all of them.
Thank you so much. Can I share some comments very briefly? I'm Julia Lalam Haraj from Orchid Project, working solely on a world free from female genital cuttings. And thank you so much, Nice, for what you've said. One tool for anyone interested in working on FGC, FGM is the UNICEF note, on a technical note on social norm change at the community level. And I'd urge people to seek out resources that are there. And it's incredibly helpful to look at programming and influencing there. The second quick point is, we know in all of the countries that practice FGC, it's done primarily as a precursor to child marriage. And the majority of countries where the practice happens, girls are cut under the age of 5. So if we can avert female genital cutting, we're really changing a girl's future and transforming whether she goes on to be married or not. We've got the indicators in the SDG side by side, 40 and 41 on the 2 practices. So seeing those more holistically. And lastly, just to share some positive and hopeful news, we've funded some work for the last 3 years in Senegal. And on Sunday, 170 communities came together to abandon both CEFM and FGC at the same time. So this is very much an African-led movement and a country-led movement. And I think our role here, both Global North and Global South, is to support at scale the movements that are happening. Sorry for not asking a question, but thank you.
Thanks for the work of Orchid.
Hi, Stephanie from Population Media Center. And for anyone who saw my talk here yesterday, I'm going to ask a question about mass media communication and its role as a moral duty bearer in a lot of countries, and the role that drama programs can play in influencing social norms and affecting that in a multi-sectoral approach as well, but really to transform societal thinking and attitudes, and your experiences in utilizing that.
Thank you. And I'll go to the last two right here. Just come a bit closer to the mic, thank you.
I'm a youth advocate at Plan International Canada, and my question was for NICE. How did you realize that circumcision was wrong, and what differentiated you from all the people around you in terms of circumcision?
Great question, thank you. Sir?
Hi, I've been listening to throughout the 2 days, a lot of talk about fairness, and all of your talks today centered on the issue of recognizing that there is a lack of fairness, and that what we need to achieve is what I think is equity. But constantly, we've been talking about equality, which I think leaves out the concept of fairness and the recognition that the starting point is not the same. So I want you all to talk perhaps about a bit of grammar, and why are we using equality and not equity when I think that is the issue.
Why don't you...
Yeah, sure. I can give you my take on equality.
We could be here a long time on that one, yeah.
Yeah.
We might
So
involve
I
some
feel,
boxes, people standing in
I
boxes.
feel that equality is the ultimate goal that we are aiming for. Equity is your process through which you will have to go through to achieve equality. So that's why I always use equality, because that's the outcome I'm looking at. I'm not looking at to stay at equity forever.
I would agree. I would say equity is kind of the process of hopefully getting you towards equality.
Who wants to answer on the social media, mass communications, and some of that, those questions around that?
Yeah, I can talk about the change, change for young people and advocates. So one of our experiences from multiple countries has helped us develop a whole resource material for engaging young people, young girls and young boys. And the crux of that is that it has to be seen as a journey of change, journey of exploring, and a journey of change. You can't go to young people with solutions. You have to start it as a conversation where you provide the space for them to explore, to acknowledge where they are. So for young boys and men also to acknowledge that the system of gender norms gives them power and privilege, and that they have to use the power responsibly, and they will have to give up privilege and this privilege is at the cost of others. And for girls also to acknowledge and to come to a realization why this system and why and how this system is marginalizing them, and that it is their right to live in an equal society. So to start off a conversation as a journey, but then also equip them with practical skills, practical life skills like negotiation, like confidence, self-confidence, having body confidence, and sexual reproductive health. So have a comprehensive long-term engagement on multiple things, but look at it as a journey together with an important element is also not to assume that your facilitators for this journey are themselves already tuned into it and So you need to invest on facilitators, first deconstructing their gender norms and their attitudes, beliefs, and practices.
Right.
And then
Thank you, and I think that's a really good example of an answer to your question, too, in terms of some models. So speaking of model of youth at the community level, we're going to end with you, Nice, and the question from our youth member here.
Yeah, thank you. And I think lastly to her question is that the first place I started realizing that circumcision is not done to all girls is my school, because I remember when I was told that if you don't agree to undergo circumcision, you will be cast. I remember I went to my teacher and asked her, because sometimes as a young girl, you might believe whatever the community is telling you because you don't know, whatever you knew, you're not exposed, so you're from that village, you don't really understand. And I went and asked her, and she told me, Nice, there's nothing like that. And I think being in school with girls from different communities whereby circumcision is not practiced also made me realize that, okay, so we have other girls in school who are not undergoing, because I think it's the pain I saw in our villages going on. I saw girls as young as 8 dropping out of school and being married and all that. So after seeing other girls in school, and I thought, okay, they're in school because they have not been circumcised. So that is when I started saying, until I agree, for me to be in school is when I agree not to be circumcised. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think I speak on behalf of all of us in this room. You talked about a journey, so thank you for this journey of this panel, which I think has been extremely rich in terms of the contributions that we've heard. A special thanks again to Nice for sharing with us your very personal story, and to all of you to come. And we're going to be reconvening upstairs right now, so including with all of our fabulous participants here. So thanks very much.
thank you.